Okay, we're going to start off in Judges chapter 13. And we'll read the beginning of Judges chapter 13 as our kind of introduction to Samson himself. This is the section where the birth of Samson. Let's go ahead and start with verse 1 and we'll read down through verse 7. Judges 13. Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Notice it says again. I think if I remember right, in the book of Judges, there's 7 cycles of that happening. Verse 2. Now, there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Indeed now, you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now, therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So the woman came and told her husband, saying, A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine nor similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Now, so here is kind of the beginning of the story of Samson, just to kind of catch us up on where we're at in history. We're about 1200 BC, so about 1200 years before the time of Jesus, before New Testament times. The Philistines, the word Philistines means sea people. They were famous sailors from out on the Mediterranean Sea. They had moved into Israel along the coastline. They'd started out just attacking and raiding like a Viking kind of thing. They decided, hey, this is a pretty good place for us to live. So they moved in along the coastlines, fought some battles, won some land, took it over, established their own towns and cities where the Israelites had been. By the way, their main place where they were is a little tiny place that today we call the Gaza Strip. That was the thing that's going on over in Israel right now between the Israelites and the Palestinians. That exact tiny little piece of land that we call Gaza is where a whole lot of this story happens. That led me to believe that the Palestinians were the descendants of the Philistines. So I went and looked it up. That's not true. The Philistines came, were there for a while, fought the Jews all this time that we have in the Bible, and then the Jews conquered them, and they kind of vanished from history. Then a different group of people move in. Their descendants are the Palestinians today. It's not the same thing. The Philistines, back to our story, the Philistines of that time, one of the things that made them such a threat to the Jewish people was they had iron weapons. It was the very beginning of the Iron Age. They were one of the first groups in this area to have weapons made with iron. Other people, like the Jews, the Israelites, had much softer metals. So obviously, if you get in a battle, that's not good for you if the other guy's got iron weapons. So it's cutting-edge technology. Cutting-edge technology. But really, whoever has the most technology oftentimes wins the battle. And that's what was going on with the I'm about to say Palestinians now, I'm messing my own stuff up, with the Philistines. And so they were doing very well against the Jews. Plus, obviously, the real big picture thing was God was mad and punishing the Jews for not being what they were supposed to be, and he was allowing the Philistines to come in and hurt them as punishment towards them. So at this time, they're a major threat towards God's people in Israel. So we read here in these verses the announcement of the birth of Samson and his purpose, what his purpose is going to be. It turns out that what Samson is going to be is one of the judges. Again, we're in the book of Judges. I'm going to turn over to chapter 2. God's people, well, here, let me read from Judges chapter 2, verse 16 through 19. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do so. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved by pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers, by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor their stubborn way. So these judges, God picked out these chosen men to lead Israel. They were leaders militarily, would fight against the bad guys. They were also the leaders of the government, and they were also what we today call judges. They kind of decided over arguments and civil matters in like a court type situation. So God appointed these people in various times and areas during this time period to be that man. And Samson is one of those in his adult life. The text says that Samson was a Nazirite by birth and was to remain a Nazirite all his life. I've had several people ask me over the years, well, what is that Nazirite thing? What exactly does that mean? If you look over in Numbers chapter 6, there's an exact description of what a Nazirite was. The word Nazirite in the ancient Hebrew means to set apart. And what it was is if you were a person who you needed to make a special arrangement with God, one of the things you could do was you would take a vow and say, I'll be a Nazirite, I'll set myself apart. And it would be for a specific amount of time usually. Every once in a while, someone would be a Nazirite their whole life. There's 2 or 3 of those listed in the Bible. Samson is one of them. But usually it's for a period of time, and for that period of time, you follow the Nazirite rules. We can read in Numbers 6 from 2 through 8. Speak to the children, let's pick up verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when either a man or woman consecrates an offering to take the vow of a Nazirite to separate himself to the Lord, then he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh grapes or raisins. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, from seed to skin. All the days of the vow, his separation, no razor shall come upon his head, until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair on his head grow. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean, even for his father or mother, for his brother or sister when they die, because the separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he shall be holy to the Lord. So if you're an Old Testament Jew, at some point in your life, you feel like I've really got to get close to God, or I really need God's help with something, or whatever your reason was, you were able to take this vow, and for that period of time that you took the vow for, you followed those rules. Samson, obviously, as we read, he's going to be a Nazirite his entire life. By the way, what were the 3 rules? You have to avoid all kinds of wine, you can't cut your hair, and you have to avoid contact with the dead. Samson breaks all 3 of those, some of them repeatedly. So Samson's a special Nazirite because God chose him to be one all his life. He didn't choose that. God chose that for him. And as a result of that, we all know Samson has this extraordinary physical strength. That was the gift that God gave him because of that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to pick out 3 lessons that I think we can learn from Samson that are pretty simple and easy for us to understand. The first one is, it's important for us to marry wisely and not let our physical desires control our decisions. We can turn here in Judges over to chapter 14, and I'll read the first 3 verses of chapter 14. Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I've seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. Then his father and mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. So we see the first lesson I want to pull out of the life of Samson, and again, I think we could make a whole list of them, but this is 3 I'm going to choose for today. First one is we have to be very careful in choosing our spouse. Samson took this wife of the Philistines. His parents did not approve. If the people that you trust the most are telling you something's a bad idea and you shouldn't do it, we need to listen to that. That goes for young people and it goes for older people, evidently. I used to think I was going to grow out of needing that. Evidently you don't. I personally think one of the most wonderful gifts, or one of the many wonderful gifts we have as Christians, is that we are surrounded by people we can trust, whom we can go to and ask for advice. You know, I've never been in this situation before. Have you ever had anything like this? Or what can you tell me about this? Asking for advice from our friends, and especially people who might be a little older than us and might be a little more wise than us, is a valuable, valuable, valuable thing. And young people and us not so young people, we need to take more advantage of that. It has helped me many times in my life, huge decisions I've had to make, small decisions I've had to make. So many times I've realized later, wow, if I hadn't talked to so-and-so, or if I hadn't talked to a couple of people, this would really be hurting me right now, that I made the wrong decision. His parents not approving, he should have listened to. Second thing, it was against the law, God's law. Old Testament scripture, that's Deuteronomy 7 and verse 3, forbade, he is a Jew, marrying the Philistines. The law of Moses said, do not do that. Samson knew that he wasn't allowed to do that. His marriage was a clear violation of God's law, and he knew it, and he did it anyway. If something is a clear violation of God's law, don't do that. That's a real simple lesson. Of course, we can have a much bigger conversation, and most of us have probably heard lessons about needing to choose wisely with a spouse, especially choosing from within the church if that's possible. Of course, we know that God is able to use his situation for good. Romans 8 verse 28 teaches us that God can use those situations for good. But for Samson, it didn't turn out so well. If you read on through the rest of the story, and by the way, if this lesson interests you at all, or just this subject interests you at all, please open up the book of Judges. There's a lot more to read about Samson than what we have time to go through. It's fascinating, fascinating story. Sometimes I read these things in the Old Testament. I'm like, wow, why doesn't Hollywood make a major motion picture of this story? I mean, go get Steven Spielberg and get all the millions of dollars and make just the blockbuster movie. With Samson, I almost feel like his story is so big you couldn't make a movie out of it. That's how big his story is. So if you're interested at all, please go read that. It's pretty fascinating. So I said it didn't turn out so well for Samson. What eventually ends up is his wife is murdered. His wife and her father are murdered by the Philistines to get at Samson. So he made the wrong choice, and it ended very badly for him. He allowed that which pleased him to make his choice for marriage. We're still in Judges 14. Let's skip down to verse 7. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased him well. He just decided, I'm going to do it. My parents both say it's wrong. The law of God says it's wrong, but I think she's pretty hot, and I'm going to do it anyway, was basically what he did. And so he did, and as we said, it ended badly. Before we're going to make any major life decision, and I would say marriage is about one of the biggest life decisions you'll ever make, we need to stop and reflect upon what God desires, not only what's pleasing to me. Ephesians 5 verse 15 says, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise." Include God and God's teachings in the decisions you're making, especially in this area. Marriage is a lifelong decision. Matthew 19, 5 and 6, and said, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." We have to make sure that we include God in those decisions. That's lesson 1. Lesson 2, easy lesson from the life of Samson, is pride goes before destruction. Let's turn over to chapter 16 and we'll read the story of Samson and Delilah. From Judges 16, I'm going to read not the whole story, but the important part of it here, almost the whole story. Let's start in verse 4. Yeah, let's skip down to verse 4. "Afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, 'Entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver.' So Delilah said to Samson, 'Please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you.' And Samson said to her, 'If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, yet not dried, then shall I become weak and be like any other man.' So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, 'Look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with.' So he said to her, 'If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man.' Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' And men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. Delilah said to Samson, 'Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with.' And he said to her, 'If you weave the 7 locks of my hair into the web of the loom.' So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' But he woke from his sleep, pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, 'How can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies.' And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death." I looked up vexed, it means impatient to the point of death. So he's just finally had enough, can't take it anymore. Verse 17, "Then he told her all his heart and said to her, 'No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man.' When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, 'Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart.' So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' So he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes. I looked that up, the word put out, it literally means bored out. And brought him down to Gaza. And they bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. Fetters or shackles, and a grinder means they had those big wheels, those stone wheels you put the grain under. Instead of having a mule or an ox move that around, they chained him to it and made him push that rock in circles over and over and over. So that's the story of Samson and Delilah. The lesson we're trying to get here is pride goes before destruction. Samson was taken with this beauty of a woman, this woman Delilah. The text says that he loved her, although notice they weren't married. So the Philistines convince her to get Samson to confess his source of strength. He says, these 3 things that would work. Finally, the 4th one, cut his hair. After the first 3 times that she said, the Philistines are upon you, and he had to jump up. The 4th time, didn't he know what was going on? It wasn't like, I can't believe this. No, he knew what was going on. He knew the Philistines were going to be after him. So why in the world did he tell her about his hair? Why did he give up his secret? I think, and not that I'm any scholar or expert on this, but I think it's because I think he was deceived because he wanted to believe her lies. This was a person he shouldn't have been with in the first place. Again, another Philistine woman. We already saw how the first one turned out, and I don't think she was the second one. I think she was on down the line. He wanted to believe her lies. He wanted to be with her, whether she was good for him or bad for him, and I'm convinced he knew she was bad for him. He wanted what he wanted, and he was letting what I want take value over what should have been. The lesson, I think, real easy is don't let anyone talk you into doing wrong. No matter how attractive they may be, no matter how persuasive they may be. Maybe it's a girlfriend, a boyfriend, maybe it's just a friend. Don't let people talk us into doing wrong just because they're persuasive or just because they're attractive. I read a line that I really, really liked. It said, Delilah was a woman with honey on her lips and poison in her heart. I thought that was pretty great. She used her beauty and her smooth words to talk this judge, this mighty man of God, into doing what he shouldn't have done. So honey on her lips and poison in her heart. I think there's people like that in this world. And I think the devil will send them after Christians because he wants to take them down. She pretended to love Samson, but it was all for her personal gain. Those 5 of the 5 lords of the Philistines, I read there was 5 little sub-kingdoms in the Philistines. So that's these 5 kings. They said, we'll pay you 1,100 coins each. It was a fortune. She was using him for her own gain, and that she was taking advantage of him. He obviously thought that the Lord would be with him regardless of what he said or did. And here's, I think, a very, very important point that maybe should be expanded out, kind of its own lesson. Samson thought, no matter what, God's going to be with me. Even when he realized his hair, hey, I'll jump up and shake this off, and, I'll run these guys off just like I did the other 3 times. But what actually happened was he jumped up and he didn't have his strength. Now, why? What's the difference between that one and this one? You know what I think it is? I think Samson's relationship with God had deteriorated. Samson in his life had gotten farther and farther away from God, farther and farther out into this world and the wicked people of this world. And he had himself gotten so far away from God. And whenever I think of things like this, I always try to tell myself, don't ever forget. If you find yourself away from God, God never moved. It's you that moved away from God. If I find myself somewhere I shouldn't be, or somewhere, not as strong in my Christianity, my prayer life is really taking a beating, I'm just not hardly praying at all, God never moved. I got further away from God. What I need to do now, I need to get closer to God. I need to put effort into doing that and get back where I should be. I think that's what happened. He didn't even realize that God had left him. He took his strength for granted. He took God's presence for granted. And what he learned is no one is so high that they're above God. God gave Samson all he'd ever need, but he chose to put his life in Delilah's hands instead. We have to be careful not to put our lives in the wrong hands. Proverbs 16 verse 18 says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. God also, though, helps us find the way back. James 4 verse 10, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. If we find ourselves like Samson so far away from God, that's what we need to do. Humble ourselves and ask God for help to get back where we're supposed to be. And our third lesson shortly talks about Samson's very last days. Let's go back to our story in Judges 16, and we'll read beginning in verse 22. So they've got him in the bronze fetters, the shackles. He's grinding away in the bottom of their prison. But verse 22 says, however, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. What a great line. Verse 23, now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, the one who multiplied our dead. So it happened, when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson, that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. Then Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars which support the temple, so that I can lean on them. Now the temple was full of men and women, and the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof watching while Samson performed. On the roof, the way these buildings were made, there was a seating type. So you had a bunch of people under the roof, almost like we would call a balcony on top where more people could watch. Verse 28, then Samson called to the Lord. No, hold on, let's stop right there. So Samson, the mighty warrior, becomes a slave. They put out his eyes so that he couldn't see. They put him to work in the mill like he's some kind of animal. Why didn't they just kill him? When his strength was away, why didn't they just kill him right then and there? Because they wanted to humiliate him. He had plenty of time down in the bottom of that prison to think about what Delilah's lies were worth and what it had cost him. He went from being the judge with all this mighty strength and power to now he's blinded, slaving away for his enemy. He had time to think about what Delilah's lies cost him. That's what sin does to us. It'll put us in far worse positions than we ever wanted to be because we chose something we shouldn't have chose. So we see the Philistines are giving credit for Samson's capture to their god Dagon, who is I looked it up, it's some kind of half man, half fish, weird looking thing. They make this celebration. They call Samson in to mock him. But God has not completely abandoned Samson. What God did was God let the natural consequences of Samson's sin take their path. Sometimes we might find ourselves in a very bad place. It might be that God let the natural consequences of our sin work out so that we can learn something. We can choose to follow God or not, but there's going to be consequences either way. If I choose to follow God and live my life for God, there's consequences for that. My reward in heaven, my better life on this earth. If I chose I'm not going to have anything to do with God, or I'm just going to be a hypocrite and put on that act, there's going to be consequences for that as well. Samson could not escape the consequences of his decisions. And so now we see the end, verse 28 through 31. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them one on his right and the other on his left. Then Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years. So the Lord, Samson calls upon the Lord one last time. In spite of his past, in spite of his not doing what God wanted him to do, denying God, getting away from God, God at this time answers his prayer, gives him back his strength. He pushes the pillars, the whole thing collapses, and he kills all these people. By the way, something I read, these weren't just ordinary Philistines. This was the upper crust. This was the 5 kings, their families, the governors, the captains, the generals, the leaders. It's all the leadership, the top of the rung of Philistine society. So when Samson does this, what history shows is it really set the Philistine nation back big time. All their leadership, it was all of a sudden gone. Remember back to the very beginning of this lesson when we talked about the angel was predicting his birth? The angel said in Judges 13 verse 5, he told his mom, "He shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines." That's exactly what happened. The thing falls, kills all this leadership. Now the Philistine nation is tremendously weak, and the Jews are able to start thrashing them in battles and eventually run them off. So, Samson's life is definitely not exemplary. He does all these wonderful, amazing things for God, but then he also does all these things that were wrong and that he should have done. He married outside of the law of Israel, outside of Israel against the law of Moses. We saw that, or you can see in there also that he fraternized with harlots. He is not above telling lies from time to time. He let, a pretty face kind of control his life. However, in the end, he finally gets right with God again. Samson underwent blindness and slavery, the consequences of his own sin, before he could realize where his strength really comes from, that his strength really came from God. Samson, that pride of, I do these major things, I can do these amazing, not miraculous, but these huge strengths because I am strong. He finally had to realize it was God the whole time. That's where his strength. I wonder how many times we fall into this same situation. I can do this. I made this much money. I made this happen. I earned this, or whatever it is. And we forget to remember the only reason my lungs keep going up and down, the only reason my heart beats from moment to moment is because God lets me. God gave me that. The only reason I had a car to drive this morning or a home to go home to is because God gave it to me. Not because I earned it, not because I'm something, but because God is taking care of me. We need to make sure we recognize where our strength comes from every day. Samson repented of his evil attitudes, and in the end, God granted him a blessing. And we see I think something very interesting. Over in Hebrews 11, there's that we call the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11. Down in verse 32, Samson's name is mentioned. Now, Samson does all these things wrong, but over in Hebrews 11:32, his name is mentioned because of his faith. In the entire New Testament, there's not a single word said about all the things that Samson did wrong. What's said about Samson is he was a man of faith, and that's pretty great. Psalm 37, 23 through 26, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Though he fall, he shall not utterly be cast down. The Lord upholdeth him with his hand. I have been young, and now am old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. He is ever merciful, lendeth, and his seed is blessed. And because God is merciful to us, the other lesson is he expects us, he requires us to be merciful also. Luke 6:36, Jesus tells us, "Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father is also merciful." If God is doing good for me, then I need to be doing good for other people. If God can forgive me of the things I did wrong, then I need to be able to forgive other people of the things that they might have done wrong that upset me. And so, conclusion, let us remember the life of Samson. In the end, he finally realized he was completely dependent on God, and God turned his failures and his defeats to victory. Our 3 lessons were, it's important to marry wisely, not let our physical desires control our actions. We learned that pride goes before destruction. Great strength in some areas of our lives does not make up for great weaknesses in others. Okay? Think about that in relation to your Christianity. And lastly, as long as we're alive, it's never too late to turn to God. God can and will use a person despite their past mistakes. However we may have failed in the past, it's never too late for us to put our complete trust in God.